Hey guys, it's Chris at Highland Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the honor and privilege of your subscription. And of course, to everybody who's watching, if you enjoy this video or get something out of it, I would really appreciate it if you would just click that thumbs up button down below. It's a great way to tell YouTube that you enjoyed my video, and they are therefore more likely to promote my videos to other viewers with similar interests. And of course, if you really like this video or any of my videos and would like to help show some financial support to my channel so I will continue making guitars and reviewing the products and tools that we use to make guitars, you can visit eguitarplans.com or my Highland Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below, and you can make some affordable purchases for plans for building guitars as well as the tools that we use to make guitars. And any purchase you make is going to help support this channel. Oh, and if you want to keep it simple, you can just click that thanks button down below and make a donation or a tip in the amount that you think is fair. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about in today's video is I'm going to be applying finish to this guitar neck. And specifically, I'm going to be applying Sutherland Wells Polymerized Tung Oil finishes. And I've been using these products now for a couple of years, and I really like how they perform. They're so easy to apply, and the results look fantastic. So I'm going to show you the methods that I use to apply the product to get the best results. And I'm also, if I have time, I'm going to try to install the stainless steel frets in this multi-scale fan fret guitar neck. So hopefully we can get to that. We got a lot to do. So I'm going to bring you a little closer and we'll get started on applying the finish. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be using Sutherland Wells Polymerized Tung Oils, and I'm actually going to be using two different products. The first is their sealer, and it's a polymerized tung oil product. Now, what a polymerized tung oil is, for those of you who don't know, it's basically just pure tung oil, which has been put through a special process. And I really can't speak to exactly what that process is. I know it involves heating the oil. And what that does is it changes the molecular structure of the oil so that it is closer to being dried. Tung oil and linseed oil go through a process called polymerization when they dry. And it can take weeks, if not months, for pure tung oil and pure linseed oil, raw linseed oil, to fully dry and cure. They will eventually dry and cure because they're drying oils, but it can take an incredibly long time. But by subjecting the tung oil to a special heating process, it speeds up the drying process. So instead of taking days, even weeks to dry and months to fully cure, it will dry in about 24 hours. It will cure, and the initial cure, in about 7 days, and then its full cure is reached in 30 days. So it's much faster than pure tung oil, or in the case of linseed oil, the raw linseed oil. Now, the difference between the high luster that I'm going to be using and the sealer is that the sealer is basically the high luster that's been thinned. So if you wanted to save money, you could just purchase the high luster, but then you would also want to get some 100% odorless mineral spirits as well, because then what you would do is you would take one part of the high luster tung oil and you would mix it in with the 100% odorless mineral spirits, a 1-to-1 ratio. And that will give you a mixture of the tung oil that is essentially the same as the sealer. I purchased both the sealer and the high luster because I do enough guitars to warrant having the sealer itself. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply the sealer to the guitar neck. Now, I've already sanded the guitar neck to 400 grit, so it's ready for the sealer to be applied to the surface. And one thing I like to do before I start applying the tung oil products is I like to wipe down the surface of the neck with just plain mineral spirits. And what that's going to do is it helps me to see the quality of the sanded surface. So if there are scratches or tool marks that I might have missed, and they can be difficult to see on a light colored wood like maple, but it will help me to see those flaws so I can correct them before I start to apply the tung oil. Now, the beauty of tung oil is it's very forgiving. So even as you're applying the tung oil, if you see a tool mark or a scratch that you missed, it's not the end of the world. You just let it dry for 24 hours and then go back and sand out that scratch or tool mark and then reapply the oil. So it's not that big a deal. So first I'm going to apply the sealer, and then I'm going to let it dry for 24 hours. Then after that, I will lightly sand the surface with 400 grit and apply a second coat of sealer, which will then dry for 24 hours. Then I will begin the process of applying the tung oil, the high luster tung oil. And that's a whole different process. So I'll explain that when we get to that point. So you can kind of see what the oil looks like. It's very thin. This product, the sealer, is quite a bit thinner than the high luster, so it will soak deeper into the wood. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering, why even bother with the sealer? Why not just go straight to the high luster and apply that from the get-go? Well, the problem is the high luster has a very thick viscosity, so it's going to sit mostly on the top surface of the wood. It's not going to soak as deep into the wood as the sealer will. The sealer, because it's thinned with mineral spirits, will carry that tung oil deeper into the wood, where it's going to do a better job of sealing the wood. However, as some of you are probably wondering right now, why not skip the high luster and use just the sealer? Well, the problem with that is the sealer can't offer the same build quality and high luster sheen that the high luster formulation offers. So ideally, we want to start out by applying the sealer to get that tung oil deep into the wood where it's going to seal and protect the wood. Then we want to follow up with the high luster because it's going to build much better and offer a higher luster and even in some cases a glossier sheen. To apply it, I'm going to be using these Scott paint and stain cloths. They're lint-free, which is really important when you're applying any sort of an oil type finish because you don't want lint drying into the surface. And what I like to try to do is fold it up so that the cut edges are inside of the cloth. That way I don't have the lint from the edges, because even though they say they're lint-free, nothing is truly 100% lint-free. There's always going to be that possibility of little lint fragments on the side or the cut edges. So then it's just a matter of wiping it on. And I try to apply a fairly liberal application of the tung oil. I like to really get the wood saturated. And this first application, I'm going to apply it, like I said, liberally, and I'm just going to let it soak in. I'm not going to come back and wipe off any excess oil later on. I'm just going to let it completely soak into the wood. And as you can see, it does darken the wood slightly. Almost any liquid that you apply to wood, especially to maple, is going to dry, or it's going to darken the wood. It will lighten up a little bit as it dries. So if you're looking to try to keep the wood a light color, the oil finishes aren't really going to allow that. They're going to darken it quite a bit. But that's actually what brings out some of the figure in the wood. And even though I didn't select this piece of maple for the neck because of its figure, it does have some figure in it, which was actually sort of a surprise. It wasn't expected. But I'm going to cover every bit of this neck because I really want to seal all the wood. Now, I've said in previous videos that applying oil does not necessarily mean you're sealing the wood from humidity and moisture, but it does help to some extent, and sealing it does allow you to rule out the potential of humidity as a factor for problems with the neck, the wood moving when humidity levels change. Then I like to use a Q-tip to get inside the tuner holes as well. I like to make sure every bit of the surface of the wood has been coated with sealer. Now the funny thing is later on when I go to install the tuners, there is a possibility I'll have to ream out the inside of these tuner holes. And if that's the case, then what I will do is reapply some of this sealer at that point, if that's necessary. But I don't think it will be. I've already adjusted, or I've already reamed them out earlier, so I should be okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang this up, and I'm going to let it sit for 24 hours to let that oil really soak in. Now, one thing that's really important to understand is the proper disposal of oil-soaked rags, because as that oil is drying, it can generate some exothermic heat. So if you have a bunch of oil-soaked rags all clumped together, that heat can be enough to spontaneously combust. And I've seen way too many garages and workshops burn to the ground because of the improper disposal of rags. So what I typically do is I just lay the rag out on the floor and I'll let it sit there until it's completely dry. It's going to take about 24 hours. At that point, I can then take the rag and place it inside of a plastic airtight container filled with water. And that's how I dispose of the rags so that they don't spontaneously combust and burn my shop or my house to the ground. All right, so the neck has been allowed to dry for 24 hours. And I'm ready to apply the second coat. But before I do that, I'm going to lightly sand the surface with some P400 grit sandpaper. And the reason that I'm doing this, there's actually two reasons. One is to promote the adhesion of the second coat to the first coat, but it also removes raised grain. Even though the product that I use, the sealer, is a solvent-based oil product, it will still raise the grain. And what happens is the liquid will soak into the tiny fibers of wood on the surface and cause those fibers to swell, and that it will dry that way. So you can actually feel the surface. It will feel slightly rougher than it did after the initial sanding. So I want to try to remove some of that raised grain, and I'll do that with the 400 grit. And what I'm doing is I'm just sanding very lightly. I don't want to remove too much of the surface. I just want to knock back some of that raised grain. And once I have finished sanding, I'll wipe off any residual dust from the surface so as not to contaminate the next application of the sealer. And the application of the second coat is exactly the same way as the first coat. I'm using one of these Scott lint-free cloths, folding the edges in towards the center. All right, now I'll hang it up and let it dry for another 24 hours. Well, guys, I think I'm going to have to end this episode at this juncture because it's taking a little bit more time to apply this finish, and I'm trying to show this process in as much detail as possible. So what I plan to do is in the next episode, I am going to start applying the high luster polymerized tung oil. And that's a process that involves a number of steps in order to achieve the type of finish that I want on this neck and fretboard. So hopefully you'll join me next week as I embark upon the completion of the application of the finish. And then probably after that, in a future episode, I'll install the fret. So it takes a little bit longer. I'm trying to keep these videos shorter than 20 minutes. And I think this one's pushing 18 minutes at this point. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, as always, please give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe button, visit eguitarplans.com or the Highline Guitars merch store. And click that thanks button and leave a tip in the amount you think is fair. At any rate, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more guitar building videos.